Huchown, Little Hugh, or Huchoun, of the Awle Ryale, Florida, 14th century, is a poet conjectured to have been writing sometime in the 14th century. Some academics, following the Scottish antiquarian George Neilson, 1858–1923, have identified him with a Scottish knight, Hugh of Eglinton, and advanced his authorship of several significant pieces of alliterative verse. Current opinion is that there is little evidence to support this evidence. The little that is known about Huchoun comes from the Chronicle of Andrew of Winton, which mentions Huchoun, that cunning day was in literature. He made a great jest of Arthur, and the haunter of Gawany. The pistol also of Susan. He was curious in his still, fair of facon and subtle, and I to pleasance had delight. Mad in meta might his dight, little and nocht nor the less. War and fra the with fastness. Cotton Manuscript Book v. 2, 4308-4318. Interest in the otherwise unknown figure of Huchoun, a diminutive form of Hugh, i.e. Little Hugh, was spurred largely by the work of George Neilson, a lawyer and antiquarian, who gave a series of lectures at Glasgow University in 1902 centered on the subject, and published a book the same year. Of the works Andrew of Winton mentions, the easiest to identify was the Pistol of Susan. This has been fairly firmly associated with the Pistol of Sweet Susan, an alliterative poem surviving in 5 manuscripts. The Jest of Arthur, also called Gest historiale and described by Winton, has been more tentatively identified as the well-known alliterative Mort Arthur, found in the Thornton manuscript of Lincoln Cathedral. The Haunter of Gawany, literally the Adventure of Gawain, is less certain. Neilson advanced that it represented the great alliterative works of Gawain and the Green Knight, and Huchoun was therefore also credited with patience, pearl, and clearness. The fact that a later hand had written Hugo at the head of the manuscript of these works was also taken as supporting evidence. The output of the Pearl poet, however, is linguistically very distinct from what seems to be the oldest versions of the works, more solidly attributed to Huchoun, and this attribution is nowadays dismissed. More likely is the suggestion that the Haunter of Gawany represents the Haunters of Arthur, an Arthurian poem in a rhymed alliterative stanza similar to Sweet Susan, which has several variants in multiple manuscripts. Identity, beyond the matter of what he may have written, who Huchoun was, is uncertain. William Dunbar, in his Lament for the Macquaries, mentions a poet called Good Sir Hugh of Eglinton, whose works are now lost. Hugh of Eglinton was a knight who was brother-in-law to Robert II of Scotland, following suggestions made by earlier antiquarians. Neilson argued that Huchoun, Little Hugh, could be the same figure, given Hugh of Eglinton's close connection with the king, and the fact that he was given safe conduct to visit London. The epithet of the Awle Ryale could be explained if it was interpreted as Awle Ryale, or Royal Palace. The biggest problem with this identification is that the poems ascribed by Neilson to Huchoun, Hugh of Eglinton, are of varying dialects, none of them Scottish. Even the poem most likely to be authentically Huchoun's own work, the Pistol of Sweet Susan, seems to be in a North Yorkshire dialect overlaying a Midland source. Gawain and the Green Knight and the other 3 poems in the Cotton Nero A.X. manuscript have a clearly northwestern provenance, while the alliterative Mort Arthur is considered to originate in the East Midlands. 2 possibilities suggested by Neilson are that a Scottish poet wrote in a southern dialect, perhaps after being educated in England, or that the Scotticisms were translated by later scribes. It seems a more likely suggestion either that Andrew of Winton's poet, Huchoun, was not Scottish, and therefore not Sir Hugh, or that the poems he mentions were in fact other works now lost. rather than the great alliterative poems Neilson claimed they referred to. Other candidates for Huchoun from different parts of England have much less detailed evidence to prove their case. Current academic opinion takes the line that Huchoun, if he existed, may have written Sweet Susan, but that evidence to link the same poet to other major alliterative works is tenuous at best. Notes. Harvey, Paul. 1967. The Oxford Companion to English Literature. London. Oxford University Press. Ward-and-Trent. eds. A.L. 1907–1921. The Cambridge History of English and American Literature. An encyclopedia in 18 volumes. Retrieved July 7, 2005. Huchoun. Encyclopaedia Britannica. 11th ed. 1911.